So good morning. This hearing will now come to order. As this hearing is fully virtual, we must address a few housekeeping matters. For today's meeting, the chair or staff designated by the chair may mute the participants' microphones when they are not under recognition for the purposes of eliminating inadvertent background noise. Members are responsible for muting and unmuting themselves. If I notice that you have not unmuted yourself, I will ask you if you'd like the staff to unmute you. If you indicate approval by nodding, staff will unmute your microphone. I remind all members and witnesses that the 5-minute clock still applies. If there's a technology issue, we will move to the next member until the issue is resolved, and you will retain the balance of your time. You will notice a clock on your screen that will show how much time is remaining. At 1 minute remaining, the clock will turn to yellow. At 30 seconds remaining, I will gently tap the gavel to remind members that their time is almost expired. When your time has expired, the clock will turn red and I will begin to recognize the next member. In terms of the speaking order, we will follow the order set forth in the House rules, beginning with the chair and ranking member. Then members present at the time the hearing is called to order will be recognized in order of seniority. And finally, members not present at the time the hearing is called to order. Finally, House rules require me to remind you that we have set up an email address to which members can send anything they wish to submit in writing at any of our hearings or markups. That email address has been provided in advance to your staff. Okay, now we can officially start. So good morning, Secretary Holland. We are so excited to have you with us today. And thank you for being here to discuss the FY 2023 budget request for the Department of Interior. Joining the Secretary today is Denise Flanagan, the Director of the Budget. Our focus for today's hearing is the President's $16.1 billion request for the Department of the Interior, an increase of $1.9 billion, 12%, over the fiscal year 2022 enacted level. Notable increases include advancing science and conservation efforts, renewable energy, remediating and reclaiming orphan oil and gas wells and abandoned mine lands, upholding our treaty and trust obligations, as well as bolstering wildland fire management. We are very much looking forward to a robust discussion on these topics. I'm proud that our fiscal year 2022 bill continued to build upon the increases this subcommittee has provided since taking over the majority in fiscal year 2021 to address the needs of Native Americans and Alaska Natives, preserve the biodiversity and ecosystem services, and ensure the protection of our air, water, and natural and cultural resources for present and future generations. To illustrate that point, since the last Obama budget, the subcommittee has provided a 31% increase for the U.S. Geological Survey. For fiscal year 2023, I look forward to expanding upon that work with significant and impactful funding that in tandem with the resources provided in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act will enable us to focus on improving our nation's economic prosperity while concurrently addressing the threats of climate change in our interconnected world. Secretary Holland, President Biden has again laid out an ambitious agenda for the fiscal year 2023. I know you have a big challenge ahead for the department to rebuild staff capacity and morale, reestablish trust in the department and its science, and address a myriad of programmatic issues such as Indian education, wild horses and burros, and clean energy development. I hope our discussion today will allow us the opportunity to better understand your priorities, both short-term and long-term, as well as discuss how the subcommittee can advance the important work of the Department of Interior and achieve our mutual goals and objectives. I'd now like to yield to our ranking member, Mr. Joyce, for his opening remarks.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my honor to join you in welcoming back Secretary Deb Holland and their Director of Budget, Ms. Denise Flanagan. I also want to thank you, Madam Secretary, for coming to Cleveland, Ohio, and visiting Northeastern Ohio last month. I appreciated talking with some of our constituents about our importance in urban reforestation and habitat restoration in underserved communities in Cleveland area and the significant role spending outside played in our lives as children. As we learn from these constituents, and as I mentioned in the hearing last year, conserving our nation's natural resources, preserving our diverse cultural heritage, and upholding our trust responsibilities are goals we all share. And while we may disagree on many of the details, we may remain united in pursuit of those goals. To that end, the department's fiscal year 23 budget proposal before this subcommittee is over $16 billion, a 14% increase over fiscal year 22. This proposed increase comes on the heels of a nearly 6% increase for fiscal year 22 and a $20 billion supplemental appropriation in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. Some are calling these investments a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I remain deeply concerned that the deficit spending is getting worse, not better. It is imperative that the federal government finds a way to live within its means so that we do not saddle future generations with even more economic burden than what they already awaits them. Inflation is at a 40-year high, due in part to excessive government spending. Interest rates are on the verge of climbing again, which will impact everything from borrowing for a new home to the cost of servicing this nation's $30 trillion national debt. Until the president's fiscal year 23 budget proposal is coupled with credible offsets and bipartisan plans for long-term deficit reduction, I believe the proposal before us today for the Department of Interior is excessive and unrealistic. In addition to the spending, what concerns me most is that the proposal continues America's fall from energy independence under this administration. Last year, the administration announced a freeze on new federal leases and canceled pipelines that would have fed U.S. refineries, and yet lifted sanctions to allow Russia to profit from its own oil. This year, this administration is drawing down the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to dangerously low levels, is vilifying domestic producers for delayed use of existing leases that are slowed by environmental reviews and litigation, is begging Saudi Arabia and Venezuela to sell us more oil, and has finally come around to the realization that buying Russian oil isn't sound policy. The department's fiscal year 23 budget makes no mention of meeting its mandate for a 5-year offshore leasing plan, which is set to expire on June 30th, and is a prerequisite for any new offshore oil and gas lease sales. Further, the budget makes no mention of resuming mandated quarterly onshore lease sales. Instead, the budget proposes new and increased fees to further disincentivize production. Just days ago, when the administration finally scheduled a handful of onshore lease sales, the department highlighted that these sales constitute an 80% reduction in the onshore acreage nominated for leasing and increase in royalty rates. Let me be clear. We share the same goal of clean, affordable, reliable energy, but we disagree on the speed and the approach for achieving it. The U.S. and most of the world are dependent upon fossil energy for the foreseeable future, whether this administration likes it or not. As has become painfully apparent, shutting off our own supplies doesn't speed our transition to renewable energy. It only makes us more dependent on others. Top-down policies that force hardship on Americans never works when the costs outweigh the benefits on their everyday lives. The price of a gallon of gasoline is more than $4, and Americans are feeling the pain not only at the pump, but throughout the supply chain. A stunning recent poll by Consumer Energy Alliance found that a majority of Americans in every age, gender, race, ethnic, geographic, and political demographic support immediate domestic energy production over increased imports. Madam Secretary, I once again urge you not to lock out America from the domestic energy and minerals it needs for a smooth transition to a cleaner energy future, and work with us to help our constituents mitigate climate risk in their everyday lives while we pursue realistic, free market, and innovative solutions to climate change and protect the interests of the American people, our communities, and our country's economic well-being. Thank you again for being here today, Madam Secretary. I look forward to our discussion, and thank you, as always, Chair Pingree, for yielding time. I yield back.
Thank you so much, Mr. Joyce. And Secretary Holland, we are looking forward to hearing from you. Please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, Ranking Member Joyce, members of the subcommittee. It's an honor and privilege for me to be here on the ancestral homelands of the Anacostan and Piscataway people to speak with you today on behalf of the President's 2023 budget for the Department of the Interior. Thank you for your support of Interior's programs in the 2022 Omnibus Appropriation. I appreciate your efforts to build capacity within the department and to fully fund our fixed costs, which are must-pay bills. I've had the honor of being the Secretary of the Interior for over a year now, and I recognize the importance of this moment for the future of the department and for our country. Through my travels and while working here in DC, I've seen firsthand how every day in every corner of the country, our employees go to work with a focus on results. They work with their local communities, states, tribal nations, and other partners to conserve and steward our nation's natural resources and cultural heritage for the benefit of everyone. Interior's programs are helping generate jobs, grow the economy, and build resilience to the challenges of our changing climate. I'm grateful to have visited many of you in your home districts. and meet the great people you represent. The work we do would not be possible without your leadership and support, and I look forward to our continued partnership. Working together, we have the ability to make tangible differences in the lives of families across the country. With your support, we have already made great progress this year. We took steps to accelerate the development of renewable energy on public lands and waters. We launched the first federal boarding school initiative to address the intergenerational impact of Indian boarding schools, deployed resources to build resilience to address the drought crisis, pursued justice for missing and murdered Indigenous people, and worked to keep tribal communities safe, and helped communities prepare against the threat of wildland fire by strengthening our federal firefighting workforce and the resilience of our lands. We also began implementing the bipartisan infrastructure law, once in a generation investments that will help communities tackle the climate crisis while creating jobs, advancing environmental justice, and boosting local economies. This funding is already at work at Interior, kickstarting ongoing efforts to address intensifying drought, wildfires, flooding, and legacy pollution. The President's 2023 budget request complements this with a request of $18.1 billion for the Interior Department. Of this, $16.6 billion is within the jurisdiction of this subcommittee. Our total request is a 12% increase from the 2022 enacted appropriation. Specifically, the President's budget invests in our country with an unprecedented total of $4.5 billion for Indian Affairs programs focused on tribal sovereignty and stronger tribal communities, up to $1.5 billion for wildland fire management to increase firefighting capacity, continue the transformation to a more permanent and professional wildland fire workforce, and ensure federal firefighters are paid at least $15 an hour. A total of $4.9 billion across Interior to strengthen natural resource management and improve the resilience of tribal and Interior managed lands, $125 million to advance the President's ambitious clean energy goals by increasing offshore wind energy power generation and permitting of onshore renewable energy technologies. More than $1.4 billion for research and development programs across the department to ensure science continues to underpin Interior's core mission activities, and implementation of our department-wide diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiative to proactively advance equity, civil rights, racial justice, and equal opportunity. I have great ambitions for the Department of the Interior and what we can accomplish on behalf of the American people. Working together, we can do more to create good-paying union jobs, increase the resilience of our lands, expand our ability to fight wildland fires, and mitigate drought, strengthen tribal nations, improve the lives of Americans everywhere. I look forward to continuing our strong partnership. In conclusion, we're doing our part to advance priorities that build a better America. Thank you again for having me, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary. We're so pleased to have you with us this morning, and I know we're going to have a lively discussion with a lot of questions coming from the committee. I want us to start with a very specific issue that actually relates to the wonderful visit we had with you in the state of Maine, and that's regarding the Indian Boarding School Initiative. In fiscal year 2022, Congress provided $7 million for the Indian Boarding School Initiative, and I know this initiative is a personal priority for you. Last June, you and I had the wonderful experience when you visited Acadia National Park of joining with Wabanaki and other tribal leaders in Maine to welcome the sun, which I think was around 4 o'clock in the morning, a very early start to our day, and take part in a talking circle with the tribal leaders. They shared their experiences with the devastating intergenerational trauma that has been caused by these Indian boarding schools. Immediately after that visit, you signed a secretarial order requiring the department to create a plan for the Indian Boarding School Initiative. I appreciate that you've done this. I want to commend you for that. And I just want to hear a little more about the progress that's been made by the department. So can you talk about that to us, about the department's work on this initiative that is so important? How are the funds we provided being used to support the initiative? I understand a report is being prepared, and I'm curious to know when that will be finalized. So would love to hear from you on that.
Thank you very much, Chair Pingree. And yes, thank you. The trip to your state was really a wonderful experience for me, and I appreciated your hosting us. So thank you very much. And I appreciate your interest and the committee's interest in this issue. Some of you may have read my op-ed. I talked about my grandparents being taken away from their families when they were both 8 years old and sent to boarding school for 5 years, away from their mothers, away from their community. So it's important for me to make sure that people know that we care about this issue, that we are doing something about it, giving them a chance to heal from this intergenerational trauma. We are working on the boarding school initiative. It should be out very soon. We expect it to be out very soon. We're incredibly grateful for the $7 million in the 2022 funding. Thank you very much for that. That will help us to continue to work on this issue. Part of it is making sure that we are really connecting with tribes. Tribal consultation has been very important in this, to make sure that we are doing what various tribes would like us to do. Tribes have different customs, different traditions. Some may want to repatriate or, bring back their, children who have been buried away from their homelands. They may want to bring them back. They may not want to. So it will depend on what each individual tribe wants to do. But I think the initial start in getting a full listing of exactly what federal boarding schools were in this country, where burial sites are, what tribes were relegated to these various boarding schools. Those are the important facts that we are working on now, and we'll get out soon. And of course, we'll update you when we have some news about the rollout of the first report.
Thank you. Thanks so much for that. I will now turn over to the ranking member Joyce to see if he has any questions.
Just a few. Thank you, Madam Chair. As you know, Secretary Holland, the President on day one issued an executive order temporarily banning new oil and gas leasing on the federal estate and directed the department to conduct a thorough review. The department delivered its report last November. It has been almost 18 months since the lease sale has been signed on the federal estate. On April 18th, the White House press secretary reiterated that the administration's policy is to ban additional oil and gas leasing on federal lands. As you also know, the law requires quarterly lease sales. Can you please clarify the administration's position? And if the law requires the administration to conduct oil and gas leasing, how can it be the administration's policy to ban such leasing?
Ranking Member Joyce, thank you so much for the question. And as you may know, the department was required by a federal court injunction, which the department is appealing, to move forward with onshore oil and gas leases. But knowing that we had to move forward, we made sure that the lease sales reflected the highest and best use of public lands. I've said many times that our public lands belong to every single American. And so we felt the need to include significant reforms that would benefit taxpayers. We want to make sure that we're consulting with tribes, taking climate change into account, because this is really the challenge of our time. I will continue to implement the oil and gas program in a way that is consistent with the law and with my authority as secretary. I'm not able to make specific announcements right now, but please know that there are about 9,000 permits currently available that have not been drilled to the oil companies. As well as, 11 million acres of land that has been leased. So I feel that the industry is set, and we're continuing to work in the best way possible.
Yeah, and I hear that a lot. Unfortunately, if by regulation and design, they can't exercise those leases and execute on those leases, the fact we have 9,000 leases doesn't make a lot of differences to our supply. But if it's the department's recent announcement for limited onshore leasing is driven by a court order, then it isn't fair to say that the administration would still have a ban on new leasing if it weren't for the courts. And if so, then why does the ban continue even after the department delivered its report pursuant to the executive order?
With all due respect, Ranking Member Joyce, there is no ban on leasing right now. And the 9,000 permits, those have already been approved, and the industry is free to use those permits in the way they see fit. They just haven't acted on those. Permitting actually continues on the land that has already been leased. And so, as I mentioned, I feel the industry is set, and and in fact, production is essentially higher than it's been in a couple decades. So on the federal lands, we're doing what we need to do, and we're following the law and making sure that we are moving those issues forward.
I beg to differ with you, Madam Secretary, but I will yield back, Madam Chair, because I know other members of this fine committee all want to ask questions as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joyce. Chair McCollum, do you have questions this morning?
Yes, I do. And first, to my fellow committee members, I apologize for the shaky connection we had yesterday. Secretary Haaland, we are so happy to have you back. And I'm proud, very proud of the increases that this subcommittee provided under the leadership of Chair Pingree for 2022. Using the 2023 budget request as a base, I hope we can build on that success to deliver more resources to implement the department's broad mission, including the conservation of our public lands and ecosystem, protecting biodiversity, endangered species, and addressing climate change with scientific research. But I'm going to focus on a part of the Interior's budget that funds our trust and treaty obligations to tribal nations, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Bureau of Indian Education. First, I want to applaud you and President Biden for listening to tribal leaders who have advocated for embracing and expanding the Tawahi Initiative. Fiscal year 2023 budget request will not only sustain funding for existing Tawahi sites, including Red Lake Nation in Minnesota, but allow for additional tribal nations to participate in this holistic, culturally affirming approach to family and community. The president's budget also includes significant increases for the Bureau of Indian Education construction. This committee, as you know, works in a very strong bipartisan, I say nonpartisan fashion, and we have prioritized children because we believe no child should attend a school with exposed wires, cracked walls, insufficient heat or air conditioning, many of the problems that we see in BIE schools. So the FY22 funding that this subcommittee provided BIE replacement projects will fund the completion of 3 schools. The 23 proposal would fund an additional 6. But we know that there's still not enough funding to fill out the priority list. Could you let us know how the department's looking at issuing new priority replacement school lists to inform tribal leaders and this subcommittee which schools are next in line? And I want to make it clear, I wish every single school was next in line, but I know you're faced with hard choices.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman, and I appreciate you caring so much about Indian country in this way. Yes, we wish we could replace every single school, as that needs to be replaced as well. But for the time being, there will be 6 replacement school projects to be started in 2023. The Cheyenne Eagle Butte School in South Dakota, the Cottonwood Day School in Arizona, the Little Wound Day School in South Dakota, Standing Rock Community School in New Mexico, Pierre Indian Learning Center in South Dakota, and Santa Rosa Day School in Arizona. There are many more. It will take us, a couple decades to, at this funding level, to get to the schools that need to be replaced as a priority. We'll continue to work on that as we can, but certainly recognize the need in Indian country for children to attend schools that are safe and, a place where they can truly learn.
Serving on the authorization committee currently this year, as well as on the appropriations committee that oversees this. I hesitate to speak for Mr. Simpson, but we've traveled in Indian country ourselves. We've seen the condition of the schools and the roads, and whatever authority you need in order to hold contractors accountable and have better contract outcomes is something that I know I would look forward to working with you on, Mr. Calvert. When he was chair, we were just shocked at the condition at which some of the schools actually were built at. With not having the right kind of oversight on construction done by the Bureau. So if you need more authority with that or something different in the contracts, please let us know so we can be of help. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Simpson. Do you have questions this morning?
Yes, thank you. I agree with what Representative McCollum just said about the schools and the need to address those. And, we can't wait 2 decades. That's somebody's born and they become an adult before we've improved their school. That's just too long. We've got to do something about this. But let me first of all, Secretary, thank you for your participation with CEQ and with other agencies in addressing a perplexing problem in the Pacific Northwest dealing with salmon and salmon recovery of the endangered species up there, and the importance that is to the tribes and actually to all of the Pacific Northwest. So I appreciate your participation in that collaboration that you're working on. Let me ask a couple of questions first. With the 6% increase we had last year and the 12% proposed this year, we're still facing a real challenge, and that is with finding employees. Everywhere I go, not just in Idaho, but across the country, BLM, other agencies, and this is not just a interior problem. I also find it in the Department of Agriculture with ARS or the Forest Service or others. We're having trouble getting our job done because we can't get the employees, or we're so behind on employees. What's the problem there? Are we having problems hiring people to do the jobs and stuff? As an example, when we authorized the Great American Outdoors Act, there's an awful lot of programs in there that we wanted to see started and stuff, but they're telling me that the delays in getting the projects approved and stuff are because we don't have the employees to approve those projects and stuff. What's the problem there?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman Simpson. And thank you for recognizing this issue. As I'm traveling across the country, everywhere I go, I make it a point to meet personally with DOI employees. We have some of the best employees, I think, in the federal government, very dedicated workforce, dedicated to our mission. And I know it's a priority for me, working to build up our workforce capacity across the department. We have a special emphasis right now in certain areas. One is wildland fire, and you probably have seen the wildland fires across the Southwest right now, namely in my state of New Mexico. So the wildfire preparedness in the BLM is something that we're paying very close attention to and working to fulfill. Being able to pay firefighters a little bit more money is helping us to recruit some folks there. And also with the land management bureaus, the national parks and national wildlife refuges, you probably have seen that there's been up to a 60% increase in visitation in some of these areas across the country, namely since COVID happened. People just find the need to get outdoors more than they have been in the past. So those are all priorities for us. We're going to focus on positions needed to break log jams in human resources and contracting. We're expanding access to qualified candidate lists across the bureaus, And in some cases, we're working with OPM to address competitive hiring markets. So we'll continue to pay attention to this. I appreciate your interest in it. We're always happy to make sure that we give you updates. Don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if we have anything else to add, we'll absolutely keep you informed.
Well, I appreciate that, but basically we can put all the money into a program in the world. If we don't have the personnel to carry out the projects and so forth that's necessary, it doesn't really do any good. So those personnel and making sure that we have sufficient personnel in the right areas is something that is critical for us. And along those same lines, you talked about paying firefighters. I went out to the Fort Hall Indian Reservation where we did a community finance project to help them rebuild their fire station out there that needed to get done. What I found out from the policemen and the firemen out there, one of their biggest challenges is they're the training ground for local community fire stations in Blackfoot, Pocatello, Idaho Falls. They train them in Fort Hall. As soon as they get trained, they get hired at a higher pay rate in Blackfoot or in Pocatello and leave. So how do we keep those? And we'll talk about this later because my time is running out, but we've got to find a way to keep these people on the reservation, be able to pay them enough so that they can stay with the organizations that have trained them. But we'll talk about that later. Yield back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simpson. That's certainly an issue I've heard about, so I hope we'll get a chance to discuss that. Next, Mr. Kilmer, you have questions this morning.
I do. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thanks, Madam Secretary, for being with us and for your leadership and your commitment to ensuring the federal government fulfills its unmet treaty and trust responsibilities to Native American communities. I'm really grateful for your visit out to my neck of the woods last summer to tour the Quinault Indian Nation's Tohola Village relocation project, which is an effort to move that village to higher ground in response to increasing threats from climate change and rising sea levels and erosion and flooding and tsunami risk. Thank you for coming to see these challenges firsthand and meeting with tribal leaders from across the region I represent. And as you'll recall, it's not just the Quinault that face urgent and existential threats exacerbated by climate change, as you heard during your visit. The Quileute Tribal School in La Push is in the crosshairs of a rising ocean. The Ho Indian tribe is located in a tsunami flood zone, and the only developed road in and out of the reservation is regularly impassable as a result of heavy storms. And the Makah Indian tribe urgently needs to relocate their health center, which is not only in a tsunami zone, but also a cell and internet service shadow that impedes emergency communication. So climate change and coastal challenges are real threats, and they also threaten significant cultural landmarks and heritage. Just earlier this week, I spoke with several tribal historic preservation officers who perform critical work protecting important cultural sites. They told me that increasing erosion caused by rising oceans have exposed ancestral remains and resting places. Unfortunately, they don't have the resources they need to monitor and mitigate that erosion risk. So I share these details in part because I want to just emphasize the sheer need and the importance of urgent and bold action. And I know that you share that sense of urgency. And it's why I appreciate your commitment to addressing climate challenges and building resilient communities during your first year as secretary. And in this year's budget proposal, I'm glad you specifically highlighted the $62 million for the tribal climate resilience program in this year's budget request, which is almost double the 2022 enacted level. Also pleased that this committee passed nearly $3.6 million in community project funding to help with the relocation efforts of 3 tribes in my neck of the woods that are trying to move to higher ground. But I think we know that addressing these challenges fully will require significant investment above and beyond what we've done so far. As NCAI President and Quinault Vice President Fawn Sharp testified to our committee earlier this month, the cost of the Quinault relocation project alone is $180 million. So we're talking about literally relocating entire communities. That's homes and schools and health clinics and justice centers and community centers and more. So I want to hear your thoughts on how your agency and the Biden administration can work with Congress to develop and execute a more comprehensive and coordinated plan to help tribes that are facing imminent displacement from their ancestral homelands and their territory that they have occupied since time immemorial due to climate change and coastal erosion. And secondly, what do you need from us? What does the administration need from this subcommittee so that we can be good partners to you in this effort?
Thank you very much, Congressman, and thank you for your dedication to Indian country, not only in your district, but across the country. It's very much appreciated, given the mission of the Department of the Interior. Yes, everything you said, I completely agree with, especially the part about me coming to your district. Thank you for being such a wonderful host, and thoroughly enjoyed that opportunity to be with the chair and the vice chair. You know, funding is one thing. Yes, it's an expensive undertaking. There are tribes in Alaska as well that are falling victim to coastal erosion. As you can imagine, a lot of those communities are on permafrost that is melting currently. And all the funding in the world would really certainly help these tribes when they need to relocate. But I think one of the most important things that that you spoke about and that we are committed to is tribal consultation. These tribes, that's their ancestral homeland. They don't know where to live anywhere else. And I mean, often, yes, tribes have been relocated at the behest of the federal government, but for certain tribes who have been in the same place since time immemorial, it's a very difficult it's emotional and it's a spiritual, you know, it's a shot to their spiritual well-being when they have to move from a land that means a tremendous amount to them. So absolutely putting tribal consultation as a priority is something that we feel very committed to. It's, you know, how does the tribe want to move, to go about this move? You know, how do they want to plan and where do they want to plan? These are all things that we have to take into consideration, and we do that. Later this summer, BIA will announce bipartisan infrastructure law allocations for community relocation demonstration pilot sites. That's one thing. Given the estimated $5 billion cost to relocate communities, for example, in Alaska and the lower 48, we will need your help. So we'd love to make sure we're staying in touch with you. I also want to add that President Biden has charged us all with an all-of-government approach to Indian country. It's not just the Department of the Interior that is working on these issues. It's every other department. It's the Department of Education when schools need to move. It's the, you know, it's the EPA. It's the Department of Energy. It's housing. All of us are charged with ensuring that we're giving Indian country what they need. And certainly when a whole community is relocating, all of us will be responsible for making sure that that is a successful move. So of course, we're always here to discuss this with you further. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if we can answer any specific questions. And I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Thank you, Madam Chair, for giving us a little extra time on this subject. Thank you.
It's an important topic, and I'm looking forward to hearing more. Mr. Stewart, do you have questions this morning?
I do. Thanks, Chairwoman, and Madam Secretary, thanks for joining with us, and thanks for the work that you do. You'll forgive me, I want to emphasize my agreement with Ranking Member Joyce and his concerns regarding energy and oil production in the West. I mean, one of the first things the administration did was, we could argue over the numbers of whether they shut it down or just made it very, very restrictive, but oil and gas permitting in the West, ANWR offshore. A greater concern is the demonization of oil and gas industry, which is an industry that every American depends on, and the attempts to demonetize and make it hard for them to get financing that they need. And the bottom line, Madam Secretary, is it leads to, as has been pointed out, nearly doubling in oil and gas prices and energy prices. And if you're a working family, if you're the working poor, this is a real challenge for people. And so we hope we can work with you in the future as we try to take advantage of our own natural resources here. And so we don't have to go to Saudi Arabia and Venezuela and Iran and ask them to increase their gas and oil production. Two questions for you, if I could, Madam Secretary, and I think there are things that we can work together on, at least I hope they can. they're local issues, but very important to my constituents. One of a good friend of mine, one of the great sheriffs that we have in my district, and I would argue, in the entire state or country, is a friend of mine, Sheriff Perkins. Calf Creek Falls is a beautiful area in southern Utah. It's part of the Grand Escalante National Monument. It's such a beautiful place that it's an area that I have asked that we could designate as a national park. Many, many visitors take the 3-hour hike to Calf Creek Falls. It's very, very remote, as you can imagine, and very difficult to provide search and rescue, and in many cases, the actual rescue. It's so difficult that Sheriff Perkins can't get volunteers to go make these, carry people out who have been sick or injured. 3 hours to get in, more than 3 hours to get out, takes a 12-man team. And as I said, he just can't get people to do it. It's so difficult, so dangerous, so exhausting. Here's a very simple solution. All we have to do is clear out some willows. We don't have to do any excavation. We don't have to build any structures, cut any trees. If we could just clear out some willows, we could provide a landing area for rescue helicopters, which could do this flight in about 20 minutes. And yet we've been unable to do that. It really is a life or death situation. Madam Secretary, can we count on you to work with us to implement a solution that we know will save lives and make this area actually safer and more accessible to people?
Thank you very much, Congressman. And I appreciate knowing about this. Of course, we're always willing to talk with you. We're always willing to work with you. We feel very committed to safety of any American who is out in a outdoor federal space. If we can follow up with you on this issue, we'd be more than happy to.
Yeah.
There's probably a lot more to it than just thinking about all the things involved with an issue like that. We'd be more than happy to follow up with you on it.
Okay, thank you. And that's what I was hoping you'd say. And of course, I suspected you wouldn't be aware of this issue. There's no way you could be. It was, as I say, a local issue. And Madam Secretary, again, if we were asking for, great excavation or a change of the landscape or anything like that, I would understand the hesitancy of the administration, but it really is a simple solution. It's just some willows that we would be able to clear, and it would be, as I said, it really is a life or death situation now. One other thing, if I could mention it really quickly in the 55 seconds that I have left, and again, this is something that we would look forward to working with you, and that is we have a bit of a conflict in Bryce Canyon National Park. We have concessionaires, which we support, and I know that you do as well. They take these animals, take horse guides down the trails. There's a bit of a conflict between the concessionaires and then a large number of private individuals who are doing the same thing. We think it's become a bit of a safety issue as well, and we would ask once again your commitment to work with us to try to find a solution that enhances the experience for people, but also leads to additional safety.
Absolutely. Very happy to follow up with you on this. As you know, we're very proud that we now have a National Park Service Director, Chuck Sams. He's top notch. I'll make sure that we are in touch with you about this issue.
Thank you so much for your help. We look forward to working with you, and thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Mr. Harder, questions from you this morning?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chair Pingree and Secretary Holland. It's so good to see you. I smile every time I say Secretary Holland. It's great to see you still in this position and to see your leadership of the department. I'll join many of my colleagues in thanking you for your visit to my district. One of the things that we talked about when you came out was the impacts that the Western drought is having. And since that visit, things have only gotten worse. You heard from a lot of the farmers in our area. And one of the things that has come up again and again in our discussions is people looking at this year, seeing the limited snowpack and fearing that we could be headed into an even tougher third year when our reservoirs are even lower than they have been. I wanted to get a progress report on the investments in Western water infrastructure that were passed last year in the bipartisan infrastructure law. There was about $1.7 billion that was allocated to Western water infrastructure in that. It's one thing to have it allocated. It's another thing to get it out the door and making sure that it's going to good projects that are putting shovels in the dirt. Can you give us a progress report on how the department has been using those funds and what projects we might be anticipating it being invested in?
Thank you so much, Congressman. And yes, fully understand the severity of the drought. We have folks here at the department who work on that issue every single day. So I want you to know that it's a top priority for us. And our heart goes out to so many people who are feeling the negative effects of that drought. The significant investment in drought and water infrastructure available through the bill and supplemental funding is much needed, and it's very much appreciated. It's important that we leverage this once in a lifetime investment to get the most benefit for those communities being hit by drought. Reclamation is taking this responsibility seriously. There's a robust program management plan in place. A team of leaders across the reclamations regions and directorates addresses each program area funded through the bill, and detailed spending plans for the 22 and 23. They're publicly available. We'll absolutely make sure that we get you a copy of that, forward it to your staff so that you have it on hand. And of course, reclamation is advancing various water storage and conveyance projects under the bill that will address water scarcity and enhance operational flexibility. Reclamation has and will also target projects that advance the statutory intent. It's an issue that, as I said, we work on every single day, and we know how much you care about it. So we'll continue to make sure that we're connecting with the local folks on the ground there and do our very best.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I just underline here that I think the implementation of this bill is actually more important than the dollars that were allocated to begin with. I think one of the things that we found again and again with water infrastructure is it can be one thing to get the dollars in a bank account. It can be another to actually make sure that they go out the door. We passed a water bond in California a few years ago that was well-intentioned, and yet even in the midst of a historic drought like the one we're seeing, a lot of that money has not actually gone towards projects that desperately need it. And I want to make sure that we get this right here. Do you have a sense of how much of that $1.7 billion has actually been invested in projects so far? Or can you give us some sort of a timeline of when you would expect that money to actually be fully invested?
Congressman, I appreciate the question. I really feel the need to make sure that reclamation follows up with you directly. I don't want to misquote or misstate anything. But I will make sure that they get to you and answer your questions specifically so that we can be on the same page.
Perfect. That sounds great. That'd be very helpful. It'd just be great to get some sort of a timeline. I know it can be a lot to really work out these agreements with individual agencies. And obviously, there's a lot of projects in our neck of the woods that we have our eye on. And we want to make sure, especially in the drought that we're seeing right now, that money is actually invested in the types of projects that we know are very much in need. So thank you so much for your leadership. And I'll yield back the remaining 4 seconds of my time.
It's a very generous yielding back there. So, Mr. Amadei, do you have questions this morning?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I do. Good morning, Madam Secretary. It's good to see you. And I'm going to kind of take the same route that some other members have taken. There's some things we'd like to interact with your staff with, but we won't try to do it in the magic 5 minutes of this context. But I will, and I'll give you a little heads up on some of them. Obviously, we want to talk about how the administration's more recent announcements in terms of supporting a green energy agenda, what they've announced that they're going to be doing through your department, how that meshes with how it helps and arguably doesn't help or whatever, but that's a discussion that's better with staff. But I want to put something on your radar screen because there's been an application in Nevada for a land withdrawal by a fellow administration agency, NASA. And so that's fine. You know, they've got a satellite GPS kind of station in Railroad Valley, Nevada, and they're concerned about that valley maybe being altered, although there's no present threats, altered by potential lithium exploration and stuff like that. So great, they've applied, Madam Secretary, and they're going through the NEPA process, all well and good, story's fine so far, until we get to the part where this agency in NEPA had a request from the county that has planning and zoning jurisdiction over Railroad Valley to be a cooperating agency. Now, you know, and everybody on this committee knows the NEPA process well enough. It's like they just want to be made a cooperating agency so that they can provide their input directly since it's located in their county. And with all due respect to the folks at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, they've said no. Now, as a credit to your folks in the Bureau of Land Management, you know, your state people, the district manager, they've kind of like, hey, Will, you know, whatever. And NASA's response is, oh, well, we'll certainly take whatever they have to say into account. But, and these are my words, nobody else's, but we just have the impression that it's less complicated if we don't let them be a cooperating agency. So let me cut to the quick. Ultimately, you will make the decision on that land withdrawal, and that's great. But I also think that we all have an obligation to respect the system. And so when somebody asks to be a cooperating agency, who's the county in which the application is made? And your people have been told no in BLM by NASA. You'll get a kick out of this. So I said, okay, I want to be a cooperating agency as a member of Congress with oversight authority and budget authority over you. Guess what? They basically turned the volume off on me. Now, that won't be the last word, but I'm sitting here going, this is phenomenal procedural arrogance in the part of, and it's going to be your guys' stuff. So the reason I've told you all that is we're going to be asking to get on whoever the appropriate person at the Department of Interior's calendar, along with the BLM person, to say, hey, as the agency who ultimately is going to make the decision, because NASA had to apply to BLM, it's like, can we please show a little respect to the NEPA process other than as the applicant? Now, I get if it was some where, but it's like, Jesus, if the county in which it's located gets told no by an agency, I mean, what's that say for our process? So anyhow, I just wanted to give you a heads up on that, where it's like, we'd really like to work. It's like, listen, BLM and Interior will make whatever decision they want after taking all the evidence, which is fine. But to tell somebody they're not welcome to have a voice in the process formally, I just, it's like, wow, how disrespectful to the whole NEPA process. So we'll look forward to talking to you about that. And like I said, there's a couple other things, but I wanted to put that on your radar screen because I have never seen that in all the time, regardless of what you think about NEPA or whatever, where you're going, no, you're not welcome to come talk, even though it's in your county. Holy mackerel. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Congressman, just very quickly, I'll just say that I believe very strongly that stakeholders deserve to be heard. I appreciate you going into detail about this, and I'll make sure that our BLM director follows up with you, and she will.
Great, thank you. I look forward to speaking with you guys on it. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Representative Lee.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Ranking Member Joyce, for hosting today's hearing. It's great to see you, Madam Secretary. And as mentioned here by many people, thank you for taking the time to come visit my district and our state. And as you know, no state south of Alaska has more federal lands than the state of Nevada. most of which is overseen by the BLM. And as Member Simpson said here, that the staffing shortage has been an issue across the West. And it's inhibited us from meeting some public lands challenges with the urgency they deserve. In Clark County, in my district, which has fully funded parks and trails projects that the BLM on BLM lands and already funded with local funds, it can currently take up to 2 years or more for BLM to sign off on the Recreation and Public Purposes Act leases that would allow these counties to move these projects forward, and more importantly, help the department carry out the America the Beautiful initiative. Could you, other than staffing, could you speak to why this approval process takes so long and what we can be doing together to help expedite it?
Thank you so much for the question, Congresswoman, and I appreciate knowing how you feel about this. And yes, we recognize that building capacity in the BLM is a priority for us. We're working on ways to expedite hiring for positions that support operations, such as contracting officers, engineers, human resources. All those efforts are ongoing, and I want you to know that we're working on it, and we're happy to follow up with you in any way, shape, or form that we can. But please know that we recognize this is an issue, and we're doing our best to remedy it.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll follow up on that. Maybe there's a way where we can prioritize projects that have the funding or sort of, shovel ready and get them out the door to ease up some of this backlog. And again, I completely understand the staffing issue, and so have some sympathy on that as well, but love to see those projects move forward. I want to turn now to renewable energy. And as we know, it's imperative to make this transition, and obviously time is of the essence. And last week, the department released its roadmap for achieving the 10 gigawatts of renewable energy on public lands by the end of next year, nearly doubling capacity. But across the West, we've seen instances where late or insufficient community consultation has prevented some renewable projects from proceeding. And in fact, last week, developers of what would have been Southern Nevada's largest solar facility pulled their project amid pushback from local residents and some conservation groups. And so as the department continues to fast track renewable energy development, what are you doing to ensure this kind of proactive early concentration with relevant communities and stakeholders? Let's work to prevent the spread of misinformation, protect key resources, and keep projects moving forward in the right direction so that we can actually get them constructed. What are your plans to do that?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And yes, I couldn't agree with you more. Proactively engaging states, counties, local communities, Indian tribes, other interested stakeholders are certainly important to moving a project forward. Thank you for that. So for one thing, in early 2022, we established an agreement with 5 agencies, the USDA, the EPA, Energy, Defense, and us, to coordinate permitting. The BLM is establishing a renewable energy coordinating offices to work with key partners. We think that might help to move the issue forward. I have a few examples for you. We've had robust coordination in combining multiple projects under a single EIS. There are seven solar projects proposed near Tonopah, Nevada, that you likely know about. DOI, BLM, and NPS, we're facilitating stakeholder engagement. And stakeholder engagement is incredibly important to me. I feel like we've really tried to do that well. Maybe some things fall through the cracks, but I will make sure that we are paying very close attention to that. But that stakeholder engagement in Lava Ridge wind proposal in Idaho, that will address concerns on potential impacts surrounding a National Historic Site there. There is a BLM updated policy to rank wind and solar projects as high, medium, low priority. We're happy to share more about that with you, and to focus our resources on most developed proposals with least anticipated natural and cultural resource conflicts. So getting the easy, they're not all easy, but getting the easy ones done first seems like a good plan to get these things in the loop. And so we'll continue to work on that. Thank you for your patience, and certainly I'll have my staff reach out to you so that we can answer any specific questions that you have.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Yeah, this is obviously an important issue in our state where we have many opportunities for this type of development. So love to work with your team. Thank you. And I yield.
Chair Capter, do you have questions this morning?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Thank you so very much. And I'm so glad you chair this subcommittee. And I'll just say, seeing Mr. Joyce from Ohio, it's a modern miracle that there are actually two Great Lakers. We both also co-chair the Great Lakes Task Force. And Madam Secretary, we are very grateful for your visit to Ohio in your early years of service at the Department of Interior. That was a great honor for us. And I want to go back to that visit and just discuss with you and with the staff that is over there at the department, compared to some of our Western colleagues who are very connected to the Department of Interior, in areas like ours, east of the Mississippi River, we have some small, at least in Ohio, Department of Interior assets, but the connectivity east of the Mississippi with the Department of Interior is nothing like what exists west of the Mississippi. So your experience, your travels, your attitude gives us a moment to perhaps use some department resources in ways we hadn't before. For example, where you visited the Ottawa Wildlife Refuge, actually came about many years ago from duck hunters. Both that one and the Cedar Point Refuge, we have built what were very tiny assets that were held privately into major points of visitation, largely without the help of the Department of Interior, although the Fish and Wildlife Service, where you visited that one site over the years, we've been able to work with them to increase holdings along Lake Erie, the most fragile of the Great Lakes, the shallowest, the most used by visitors. We have millions of boaters, and we have lots of fish, and we have I think it's about a $16 billion, well, it's about a $7 billion fishery, about a $16 billion boating industry. So we're talking about a lot of money, all of it threatened by the Asian carp. But what would help us, I think, is to have some type of effort working with the department to bring some of your planning staff, where we could bring our local stakeholders, the Fish and Wildlife Service, from the Cleveland area, the National Park Service, because the Cuyahoga Valley National Park is one of the largest and most visited in the country. It's in the top 10, but there's no connectivity. We have a Perry Memorial that's probably the smallest federal park that sits out by the lake, memorializing what happened related to the war in 1812. But there's no connectivity, there's no common interpretation, there's no pathway that people move through Department of Interior holdings. There's almost no cooperation between the National Park Service and the Fish and Wildlife Service. It's like two different creatures. So with the funding in your bill as well as the new funding in BIF that provides for such things as cross-lake interconnectivity and trail connectivity. It would be very valuable to us to have a discussion working with our state park people. We have very few forests up in our part of the state, but there are some down the southern part of Ohio. But the metro parks, the Toledo metro parks, for example, were #1 metro parks in the country last year, Toledo, Ohio. We are so proud of our community. And the Cuyahoga Valley Park and some of the metro parks in the Cleveland, greater Cleveland area just have historic visitation. We are about to receive along the lake at our refuges hundreds of thousands of birders. We've built up birding into nature tourism as a major economic development sector for our region. But all of this is just dots on the map. There's no connectivity. So I'm just asking if you could consider some type of meeting that we could hold, a working meeting, where we could bring together all these stakeholders that can make a difference, and then think about a future where the former Northwest Territory, which settled America after the 13 colonies, would have interpretation. That does not exist in the mindset of the Department of Interior. But with your leadership, I think maybe we can take a step in that direction. So I'm just asking with my question, can you think about helping us connect the assets there with common interpretation, working with our state and local stakeholders?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And yes, I recall being at the Wildlife Refuge with you and you talking about this and actually seeing it in real life. So it was beautiful. It was a beautiful place. And I'm so grateful that I had the chance to be there with you. We're absolutely happy to speak with you. I'll make sure that my staff reaches out to your staff, and we would love to engage in a conversation about this. And thank you so much for caring about the area and really wanting that space for folks to truly enjoy. So we'll absolutely be in touch, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you. And I'll just say, in terms of historical tourism, and I'll end with this, if you think about the name of Lake Erie, many of the counties you were in, Cuyahoga, Erie, Ottawa, there's a Native American history there that has never been allowed to be brought up, as well as the fact that we were on the Underground Railroad, and that particular lake and its connectivity to Canada is an historic place. It's as though it never happened, but it did happen. And so I feel a responsibility, and I think with your leadership, maybe for the first time in modern history, we can do something that's been left out of America's history books. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair Capter. Sounds like you've got some. Oops. Chair Cartwright.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Secretary Holland. What a delight it is for us to have you at the helm of Interior. You are carrying on a proud family legacy of public service with your father, a 30-year Marine Corps combat veteran, recipient of the Silver Star for Valor. Your mother, a Navy veteran, 25 years in the BIA herself. Thank you for doing this service and carrying on your proud family legacy. You know, it was a thrill to have you in my district too. It seems like you visited everybody's district on this whole subcommittee. What are you up to here? And you were up in my district in the chill of winter. I know it gets cold in Albuquerque too, but it was pretty cold in northeastern Pennsylvania when you toured abandoned mineland sites with me. And thank you for all the work you're doing to implement the IIJA and its devotion to cleaning up abandoned minelands and acid mine drainage. And we'll be talking a lot about that. I also was thrilled to have NPS Director Chuck Sams up in my district last week. On Friday, we were in the Delaware Water Gap National Recreation Area together. What a terrific guy. It was a thrill to meet him. But I want to talk about MMIW, something that you brought to our attention in your time in the House. You were a leader in tackling the crisis of violence against Native Americans, in particular, the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and persons in general. Under your leadership, our 116th Congress, we passed the Not Invisible Act of 2019, which directed the Department of the Interior and the Department of Justice to establish a joint commission to advise both departments on intergovernmental coordination and best practice, looking to hear from law enforcement, tribal leaders, survivors, and other important voices. Now, in October of last year, 2021, in response to a GAO recommendation, Interior said that it had created a timeline for that commission and was in the process of receiving and reviewing nominations for it. Madam Secretary, would you be able to update us on the status of that commission, its nominations, and the proposed timeline for action?
Thank you very much, Congressman. Yes, it was wonderful being with you, even though it was cold. It does get cold in Albuquerque. The thing is, winter only lasts about 2 weeks there. But I'm getting used to the cold weather fast. In fact, last week I was in the highest point in the United States in Uktiavik, Alaska, and it was 4 degrees up there. And I survived. But nonetheless, I appreciate this. You might remember that I worked hard on the Not Invisible Act when I was in Congress. I was very proud to get that passed, and of course now proud to implement it. We're working hard on that. We had a lot of interest from folks, sending in their names, people they want to participate, and that's really a good thing. I don't have an exact date for you right now, but we're working closely with the Department of Justice as we need to on this issue, and we will, you can expect an announcement soon, and we'll absolutely make sure that you know about it when we do.
Good. And as chair of the House Appropriations, Commerce, Justice, and Science Subcommittee, I am particularly interested in the collaboration of Interior with Justice. Will you keep us posted on the collaboration and the extent of cooperation that's going on there?
Absolutely. We will absolutely keep you informed. Yes.
Thanks so much. And Chair Pingree, I yield back.
Thanks very much for your important question. Well, Secretary Helen, with your indulgence, we'll go to a second round of questions for any members who have things that they would like to discuss. And I'll start with a topic that I'm interested in. These are the USGS Climate Adaptation Science Centers. In fiscal year 2022, the bill provided an increase of 10.6 million for the National and Regional Climate Adaptation Science Centers, known as CASCs. This is a great partnership-driven program based out of host universities that goes ahead and analyzes the impact of climate change on ecosystems and natural resources and develops adaptations to protect natural places and local communities. So I'm curious to hear you talk about how the funding increase in 22 will be allocated, what critical science needs it will be focused on. And in the 23 budget, there's an increase of 32.5 million for national and regional climate adaptation science centers. And I'd love to hear more about how this will further the ongoing work of supporting climate science needs. So can you discuss that a little bit?
Thank you very much, Chairwoman. And, I'm really proud here. We have the best team of scientists at the USGS, and they work hard every single day. And I've had a chance to visit with many of them. So the USGS Climate Science Center partnerships with universities, as you know, they conduct climate research and strategies to minimize regional climate impacts. In the Southwest, we're partnering with the U.S. Forest Service and other public land managers to inform post-fire forest recovery strategies, which we know in this day and age is extremely important, especially in light of climate change. In your state, we're working with the Wabanaki tribal nations to mitigate climate impacts to critical tribal natural resources, building a regional tribal network for climate adaptation documenting culturally appropriate adaptive management tools and techniques for tribal leaders. We feel very committed to ensuring that tribes have opportunities to move on these issues as well. And I may as well mention here, Chairwoman, that tribal ecological knowledge is something that is extremely important to us. We feel very committed to and grateful, in fact, that we're able to learn from tribes who have stewarded these lands since time immemorial, for a lot longer than our country has been a country. So wherever it's possible, we are working with tribes in that area as well.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. And I really appreciate your unique perspective on that. As you say, we have a lot to learn from the tribes and their long-term preservation of the land. So it's an important time to be melding those two things. And also, I'm excited about this work at the USGS. I feel like that's one of our under-recognized and extremely important agencies of science. And given the fact that so much of our future focus is going to be on the science of weather, they're in such a good position to do it. So I hope we can continue to support their work in any way possible. And lastly, I'd just like to say thank you so much for your strong support of science and bringing back science to the Department of Interior and recognizing it as a critical role that you play. So we want to continue to support you with that. And with that, I will recognize Mr. Joyce for any questions he has.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. I hate to sound like a broken record, Madam Secretary, but the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act requires the department to prepare and maintain a 5-year offshore leasing program that best meets the national energy needs. The current 5-year plan expires on July 1st and authorizes 3 areas for lease sales on which the department has not acted. Question: will the department have a new offshore 5-year plan in place on July 1st? And if not, does the department intend to finalize the next 5-year plan in fiscal year 23? Further, does the department intend to conduct further lease sales in fiscal years 22 and 23? And when does the department anticipate resuming holding lease sales in the Gulf of Mexico that are already authorized in the current 5-year plan?
Thank you very much, Ranking Member Joyce. I'll try to answer all of your questions. If I forget one, please remind me. I appreciate that. Just with respect to with the new 5-year plan, you may know that the previous administration had stopped all the work on a new 5-year plan. That was in 2018. That was after their proposal received a lot of opposition for drilling in places where folks didn't want drilling. The internal work at BOEM has been moving forward on a new 5-year plan. Our staff there has been working hard on this. There's a significant amount of internal work that still needs to be done. You also know that there was a lot of varying and conflicting litigation that has been a complicating factor for our department. And of course, we're always happy to update you on timing as our work continues in that area. Were you asking about the status of remaining lease sales?
Yes.
As well? Okay. So the current 2017 through 2022 National OCS program that expires on June 30th, there are 3 scheduled lease sales remaining: 258, 259, and 261. Our recent court decisions have impacted work on remaining lease sales for that period of time. And BOEM's internal work remains ongoing. As I always say, we want to make sure we're following the law on these things. No decisions have been made regarding the remaining lease sales for that period, 2017 to 2022. And so I don't have any updates today, but of course, we're always happy to be in touch with you in your office.
I certainly appreciate that and any updates that may follow. I want to switch subjects to something else of interest. Last September at Pecurus Pueblo in northern New Mexico, BIA law enforcement confiscated 9 cannabis plants from a man who was growing them in his garden. He is enrolled in the state's medical marijuana program to ease post-traumatic stress and anxiety, and these plants provided a full year of treatment. Though not a tribal member, the gentleman lives on a pueblo where the tribe, like the state, has decriminalized medical marijuana. The incident has sent a chill through Indian country as tribes are unsure if the federal government will continue to enforce and prioritize federal marijuana laws only on reservations. Do you agree with BIA's law enforcement action in this case? And further, have you taken or do you plan to take any steps to change policy from such actions occurring in the future where both the state and the tribe have legalized medicinal marijuana?
Thank you so much for that question, Ranking Member Joyce. And of course, this question involves the authority and policy of the Department of Justice as well as the BIA. And therefore, of course, I respect that we have to have a unified administration approach on this issue. Tribes have authority to make marijuana legal in their reservations under tribal law. Although I cannot change the federal law, I understand the issue. I understand that, you know, what tribes are saying. And I generally, of course, respect tribal laws. We want to work in partnership with tribes on any public safety issues and their priorities. Here, this specific policy approach involves the Department of Justice. And what I could say is I am always happy to work with the Department of Justice on a variety of Indian country issues. And I will be happy to continue to update you or speak more specifically about this issue. I understand and appreciate you caring about it.
Well, God bless you, Madam Secretary, and all your hard work. And I continue to look forward to working with you together with Chair Pingree and the rest of this committee moving forward. Thank you. I yield what no time I have back, Madam Chair.
There was imaginary time you yielded back. And thank you for bringing up that last topic. I think that is important. And I hope we can have a further conversation about it. Chair McCollum, do you have a second question you'd like to ask?
Yes, I do. I'm going to kind of go back to the budget in general. I think something that's been very frustrating for both all of us in a nonpartisan fashion is as we want to move Indian country forward, we find ourselves trapped in spending patterns that were developed, you know, by past administrations. We can go back hundreds of years on this for Indian country. So I'm encouraged to see the administration trying to do the right thing in moving towards the way contract support costs are being held and payments for tribal leases are being held by changing that in a way to reclassify them as mandatory spending, because they are obligations, they are not options. And when this committee is forced to treat them as options because Chair Pingree has EPA, Bureau of Land Management, and so many other responsibilities in here to try to get the right thing done the right way becomes very hard. So I would like you to talk a little more about how living up to our trust and treaty responsibilities by treating these as mandatory will not only help right wrongs in Indian country, but will also help engage all the important work that you do side by side with this committee for all the other spending we need to do. And if you have a comment, and maybe in lieu of taxes, also, I believe, used to be mandatory, and then it was made non-mandatory by previous Congress. That's also had a huge impact on our ability to do things right for the Department of Interior. And that year alone, it has a 10% increase. And I'm a recipient, my state's a recipient of payment in lieu of taxes. I think it's the right thing to do, but that also should be mandatory. So I'm going to give you 3 minutes to talk big picture about how we can right size this budget. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congresswoman. And I mean, generally, if tribes don't have to worry about certain parts of their budget, then they're free to work on things that they know will help their communities. I think it's difficult for them sometimes to plan ahead when they don't know what they can expect. And of course, we appreciate everything that the Congress does and your committee does to ensure that we have the best support possible to give to tribes. With respect to contract support costs and tribal lease payments, the budget proposes to reclassify funding for tribal contract support costs and tribal 105L lease payments from discretionary to mandatory in 2023. Yes, that would be a game changer for tribes. And as I mentioned, they wouldn't have to fight for these funds every year or trade off or cuts to other tribal programs. It's sort of like, you know, everything's important. And as you stated, if you recall, when I first came into Congress, shortly before I was sworn in, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights came out with a Broken Promises report and pretty much laid that out. Over decades and decades, that tribes have been underfunded in so many ways. So we recognize that. We think that the 105L lease funding would allow tribes to drive infrastructure investments, which we know is incredibly important to them. You know, sometimes folks just want to have running water, or they just want to be able to log onto the internet, and their kids should be able to attend a school that isn't going to, you know, flood when they walk in. These are all things that we know would be a tremendous help to Indian country. This proposal with respect to the 105L leases would ensure that funds are available without reducing funding for other tribal priorities. Everything's a priority in Indian country. And so we will absolutely do our best to make sure that, you know, whatever we can do, we do. And a lot of these priorities, you know, we learn because we feel that tribal consultation is really going to, you know, it's a hallmark of this administration. It's President Biden's priority, it's our priority, not just the Department of the Interior, but across the federal government to consult with tribes. Those are the things they tell us, and we're very grateful that you're listening as well.
I think you're muted, Chair McComb, if you were saying something else.
I was just thanking you for being so gracious and such a fabulous chair, and thanking the secretary.
Whoa, thank you. There's never enough thanking of the secretary. Representative Simpson, do you have a question you'd like to ask?
There we go. Okay. Yes, I would like to, first of all, I'd like to thank you, Secretary, for being here today. And as you can tell, both Republicans and Democrats, whether it's under Chairman Pingree or McCollum or Ken Calvert or myself, even back to Norm Dix or Jerry Moran, when I've served on this committee in a bipartisan fashion, we have all been committed to keeping our treaty obligations and trust obligations with tribes. And you've got a committee that will work with you to try to make sure we do that. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate the emphasis that the administration and you have placed on that, and we want to work with you on that. Three things I do want to bring up. Two of them are just a little advice maybe, and the last one is a question. So the first one is, as you know, I've been able to put language in the appropriation bill for several years, preventing the listing of sage grouse in the West. It's not because we don't care about sage grouse. It's because when it was originally started under Secretary Salazar, he encouraged the states to get together and create sage grouse plans with local communities and the federal government. And then to enact those plans. And states have worked very hard to do that. Idaho has worked very hard to do that. If we're going to save sage grouse and the habitat for sage grouse, it's going to take the local communities, it's going to take the states, and it's going to take the federal government. When you list sage grouse, all of a sudden you eliminate the state and local input or a desire to participate in that. So it is, I want you to keep track of that. And remember, we need to keep the states and local communities involved in that. That's the only reason we put that language in there. so that we don't list them. It's not to prevent that we don't care about sage grouse going extinct. That's not the case at all. So that's just a little piece of advice to look forward to. The other one I want to get back to is the personnel in this department. And, you know, coming from the West, you know that the reason that many of us live in the West is because we love our public lands and we want to have access to those public lands. Access is an issue. Great American Outdoors Act, it was supposed to increase the access to these public lands and stuff, but we are having a real difficult time in trying to enact some of those programs and some of the projects because we don't have the personnel to do that. So whatever we can do to help you get the personnel so that we can move on those in a quicker fashion and implement the intent of the Great American Outdoors Act, as well as other programs, let us know, because that's critical. As I said, you can have the best, you can put a lot of money into these programs, but if you don't have the personnel to carry them out, it doesn't really mean anything. Last issue that I want to bring up is we've talked a lot about gas and oil. The other issue is our supply chain and critical minerals in this country. It is a huge issue that we are dependent on, frankly, countries that don't really like us for a lot of the critical minerals. As an example, in Idaho, we have a mine that is developing antimony, golden antimony, that will actually do a cleanup of a previous mine from World War II. It's been 6 years in trying to get that permitted, which is just crazy. We have another one that's cobalt mine. They've been over a decade getting the permitting for that. What are you doing, or what should we be doing to streamline the permitting process so that we can have access? We have all these critical minerals and rare earths in the United States. Most of them are located on public lands. So we need the access. We need to streamline the permitting process so that there can be some certainty in that, and that we don't become more and more dependent on, frankly, people that don't like us for some of these rare earths and critical minerals. So what can we do to help you streamline this process so that we can get access to these?
Thank you so much for the question, Congressman. And so the permitting process ensures mining of critical minerals is not done at the expense of natural resource and tribal and rural communities. We recognize the importance of critical minerals and the need to improve the process. As you know, President Biden believes very strongly in energy independence here in our country, and critical minerals are important to our move on this transition to clean energy. We established an interagency working group that will recommend reforms to the hard rock mining laws and permitting regulations. One of the goals of that interagency working group is to improve the permitting efficiency and the outcomes. Yes, 10 years is a long time. I recognize that. This report will be delivered to Congress later this year with some recommendations. We would appreciate your input at that point. Just know that BLM continues to process mining applications currently, including those for lithium, vanadium, and other critical minerals. They'll continue to do that, and we are working on on the permitting efficiency and outcomes. So thank you so much for the question, and happy to give you more details as time goes on.
Thank you. I look forward to working with you on that, because it's something critical we've got to do. And of course, with the goal of batteries, wind power, nuclear power, all of those kind of things, a mineral like antimony is critical to all of those things. So achieving some of your other goals, it's important that we have those critical minerals. But thank you, Chairwoman Pingree, and thanks for this hearing. And thank you, Secretary, for being here today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Simpson. I think that is a really important topic that you brought up at the end, and I will look forward to having a chance to hear more about it. I think we're all going to learn the names of minerals that we never knew existed before, and we got to do a crash course in that. So, Secretary Haaland, thank you so much for the time you spent with our committee today. We are really pleased to have you in your role. Thank you for bringing your experience and your perspective to that role. We look forward to continuing to work with you on this year's budget. And thank you to Mr. Joyce for being part of this important hearing. And with that, seeing no more questions, the hearing is now adjourned.
Thank you.